Hello, nerdy romantics. We are here today talking about Superman and Lois. We have talked about Superman and Lois before for season 1 and season 2 on a previous episode. And so today we are going to talk season 3 and season 4, and we'll review them. We will also give them a Goodreads rating. Well, we'll give a Goodreads rating for the whole series since season 4 is actually the final season of Superman and Lois. And today I have with me Perry. Perry, how's it going?
I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm doing pretty good. I got the Superman shirt on. Oh my gosh. I wanted
I'm
to
actually, mine was in the wash, but I got my Batman shirt instead.
All right, we're still in the DC universe. Before we
Mhm.
totally get started with this, I do want to mention obviously, we're going over all the seasons. So we are going to spoil every single season of Superman and Lois, probably. And if we don't, that'll be a miracle. So, spoiler alert. If you have watched Superman and Lois, stay tuned. This is the Nerdy Romantics Podcast, and I'm your host, Y.M. Nelson. Okay, Perry, I'm glad you're doing well, and I'm glad you have come on the podcast to talk Superman and Lois with me because season 4, I have some questions. As everybody knows here, we are a podcast where we consider the comic books canon, yes, but I don't actually read comic books or graphic novels. I am getting there, but I do have a respect for it. And I do also have an understanding of people who are coming from or watching these and being interested in these superhero shows and movies without necessarily a comic book connection. However, Perry, my recurring guest host, has an extensive knowledge of the comics and sometimes helps me with this. But in season 4, correct me if I'm wrong, Perry, but from the little bit that I know, this seems like it comes directly from a very famous Superman comic. Yeah.
Yeah, so well actually there are a few different ones that are kind of that they're pulling from with this, but obviously the main one at the start of season 4 is the famous Death of Superman storyline, which has now been it's weird. It feels like that a lot of times a lot of these adaptations, they seem to have two go-tos for Superman. It's the origin story and it's the death of Superman story. And
Yeah.
there's like, 80 some years of history that they can also pull from. So, because this
Right.
is I'm trying to think. This is, I think, at least the third, no, fourth live action version we've seen of the Doomsday character. So he appeared first on Smallville, and then they didn't do the Death of Superman story there. They also did it on the Krypton series that was on Sci-Fi, which was featuring
Okay.
actually Superman's grandfather, I believe, is the main character in that. And then they had him in Batman v Superman, which again they killed off Superman at the end of that movie, and the less said about that movie is probably the better. And then they brought
Exactly.
him and then here at the end of season 3 they brought him in as well, bringing back the Bizarro Superman from season 2 that we talked about
Right.
last time. We talked about Superman and Lois. So they brought back that Bizarro Superman, and they changed him into Doomsday, which is not how he comes about in the comics. He's a completely separate character, but the way that they changed him, where they're constantly killing him and he's being reborn, and then each time he's kind of evolving. That's
Right.
basically Doomsday in the comics. It's just not a Superman clone or alternate Superman type of thing.
Okay.
And I haven't seen the Krypton version, so I don't know about that. But from the ones I have seen, Smallville, BVS, and now Superman and Lois, I think this is the best that Doomsday has looked in live action so far. But other than that, I've got some quibbles with the way they chose to handle this storyline, which we can talk about in a little bit more depth. But season three, though, wow, I think
Yes.
season three is definitely the highlight of this series. I mean, and season
Yeah.
four is good. Don't get me wrong, I did enjoy it a lot, but I don't think it hits the highs that season three hit.
I'm gonna agree with you there. I loved season three, and I will say when season three first kind of started, it hit it. It didn't literally hit me, but yeah, it figuratively hit me out of left field because I was like, this is we're definitely in a superhero show. There's no qualms about that, but we're getting real life drama here. This is like it was like an episode of This Is Us or something. It was or a million little pieces. It was real life drama filled. So, for everybody listening, I was just telling Perry that I had not seen season three. It's been a while since I've seen season three. So all the small little nuances of season three we may not touch on, but the one big thing about season three is the real life kind of help. It doesn't have anything to do with superheroes, but Lois Lane has breast cancer and she is going through that whole struggle. And they show the dynamic of the family. They show how Clark is dealing with it. And, this is not something he can't just say, oh, heal. That's not part of his superpowers. He can't deal with that. And then there's also, with Lois, there's this whole Bruno Manheim story and everything. She's trying to get a story. She's trying to get, and, I felt like she was trying to get a really big story to kind of end her career in case the breast cancer ended her life kind of feeling. It was that tense, feeling throughout with Lois. And I was here for all of it. Perry, what are your thoughts on this? And I mean, obviously with superhero with comics, there is obviously real life drama and things that go on with that. But I mean, is any of this in the comics? Just want to ask. That's just a yes or no kind of thing. But B, what did you just think of the season itself and that particular plot line, the whole Lois character arc? What did you think?
So so no, it's not in the comics. There have been other stories where, Lois has come through, like she's been, I think I haven't read this run, but I think there's one where there had been some sort of condition she had or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but no specific cancer story as far as I can remember. Perry White had cancer, the editor in chief of the Daily Planet, their boss of the Daily Planet. There's a storyline where he had cancer in the
Hmm,
90s, I think it might have been, in which he had ended up beating it. So no,
cool.
that never happened in the comics, but overall I loved it. It was like that was one of the things that really drove a lot of the drama in this season. And
Mhm.
one of the things that annoys me as a Superman fan is whenever people say that, oh, he's not interesting because either, he's too much of a good person, too much of a Boy Scout, or that
Oh,
he's too powerful and you can't threaten him. Well, I mean, on the first point, I mean, I think that the idea that a character is not interesting because he's a good person kind of makes me wonder. It's like, what is it wrong with you then in your
right,
life?
exactly. What are you about?
um,
Oh, there's a romance angle to that too, but we can talk about that later. Go ahead.
yeah. but also the idea of like, he's too powerful, you can't challenge him. Well, this is how you do it, because he does
Yes.
care about people. So
Right.
the thing about Superman, I've always said, it's like he's not worried if Mongol or Doomsday comes in and punches him in the face. Yeah, that's gonna hurt him, but that's not gonna hurt him as much as someone holding a gun on an innocent person, right? That is something that
Right.
hurts him a lot more. That's something that's gonna be the bigger threat to him. Yeah, it's superhero comics, superhero storytelling, so we want fight scenes, we want action and all that, but the core of Superman's character is that he cares about other people, and that's why he uses power. So the best way to give him a challenge is to threaten someone he cares about with something that he cannot punch. That is the
Hmm.
perfect way to challenge him as a character, and that's what season 3 did amazingly well.
Yes, I totally agree. I totally agree with that. It's like, yeah, Superman, you can't fight this. It was really Lois's season. He had to kind of step back, and also you could see kind of within him, a little struggle going on within him. How am I supposed to deal with this? Lois is very strong willed. And so, there were times she wanted to go and she wanted to do this story. And he was like, no, you need to sit down. You can't deal with this because he has the protector vibe. He
Mm-hmm.
has that. That's where his conflict is. I totally agree with what you're saying about that. That's where the real conflict comes with him is how do I protect? And then there's been instances where it's like, who do I protect? Like, we've got stuff going on over here, but then, we've got stuff going on over here. How do I protect everybody? So he does have conflicts. I don't understand why the good guy thing comes around, but
Yeah.
from a romance standpoint, those are the fans who like dark romance and like alphas. Those are those people who want some morally gray evil going on in the romance world. That's who they are. Oh gosh. But
And also,
anyway, yeah,
well,
go
speaking of
ahead.
the romance angle too, like this season really brought the romance stuff too. There was
It
tons of romance
did.
stuff
I
happening in
was
this.
gonna mention that. Yes. Yeah. So this is the thing. In the comics, do Superman and Lois get together and are they married and do they have kids? I think we actually asked this on the last one, but I can't remember what you said.
That's
I'm
okay.
sorry.
But yes, they've been married since the mid 90s, I think. I think it was like 95, 96 when they got married. So they've been married, for a long time, except for when DC rebooted their universe back in 2011. They briefly there was like a 5 year stretch or so where they weren't together, but then they backtracked on that because the fan reception was really bad to that era. So they stepped back on that, and they brought Superman and Lois back as the pre-reboot versions, they were married as well, and this time they had a son, Johnathan Kent. And when he was introduced in the comics, he was, just a about like, elementary school age, so like, 8 to 10, somewhere along those lines. But then which really annoys me, because they did this storyline where they had him shuffled off to the future, and then when he came back he was basically like a young adult, and he had briefly taken on the super mantle himself. And yeah, that's a storyline that really kind of annoyed me, because they had a Superboy character there already, not Jordan. Instead it was Connor Kent, who's a teen clone of Superman, who's
Right,
also,
right.
if you watch the Titans show,
The
he was on that. If
Titans.
you watch
Yep.
the Young Justice animated series, he was on
Yep.
that as well. This is the 90s Superboy. And they had a nod to that in Superman and Lois a few times. The Bizarro Jonathan in
Yes.
season 2, he was wearing the 90s Superboy costume. And then at the end of season 4, when we see Jordan and Jonathan both donning their costumes, they are both wearing versions of the Connor Kent Superboy costume. Jonathan's
Okay.
wearing the like the 90s version of it, and then Jordan was wearing the 2011 version of that costume.
Oh, cool
So yeah,
Easter
they
egg.
had but one of the annoying things about it is they they didn't know, since they gave all this stuff to Johnathan in the comics, they didn't really know what to do with Connor, so he felt very kind of superfluous in the comics. Whereas and I'm not going to get too much into that because most of your listeners probably don't care about my little rants about the comic stuff.
I
But yeah,
find
they
them
are married.
interesting, but
They do
yes.
have a kid. And one of the things too we got here, speaking while we're on the Sun things, we also got a recast this season because
Mhm.
now we have, I'm just double checking his name. Michael Bishop takes up
Yes,
the role of Johnathan Kent, and I can't remember who played him in the previous seasons, but it was a different actor. And so now we got Michael
right.
Bishop instead, who plays him in this season and also in season 4. So, what did you think of that casting change of bringing in a new actor for Johnathan? What do you think about Michael Bishop's part in it?
So I liked him actually. Jordan is a little bit, unpredictable, a little bit off the rails, and he played the responsible teen a little bit better than the previous actor did. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to take anything away from the previous actor because I believe we said this when we talked about season 1 and 2. I think he stepped back because that actor was having some personal issues or something, and he wanted to step back for his mental health. And I
Mm-hmm.
am all for that. I'm totally for that. Make sure you have your mental health in order. I mean, that's number one, your health all
Right.
around. So, not taking anything from him, but I did like him in this role. And I guess too is they gave him this storyline because in season 3 he doesn't have powers. So they gave him kind of this storyline that went with Kyle being a fireman, and he wanted to learn how to be a fireman and everything like that. So he knew he didn't have powers, but he also wanted to be a protector. He still had that same protector vibe like his dad. And whereas Jordan, is like, I hey, I'm the mask, whatever he called himself in the
Mm-hmm.
beginning there, the mask, whatever. Yeah, he just wanted to be on social media. He was saving people just so and saving people and getting selfies afterwards. It was like, I'm like, oh, so the opposite thing here, it really came into relief with him. And I'm not sure it would have with the other, it wasn't playing out like that in the first 2 seasons with the other actor. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it was just because of the storyline and where they wanted the storyline to go, or if it's just this was the dynamic between the two of them, but I liked it. I liked it. What
Yeah,
did
I
you
liked it.
think?
I liked it too. He didn't sell me on him so much for the start, but as the season went on, I really started
Yeah.
to grow to really like him. If I was going to compare the two with, and Jordan Elsis is the name of the actor who played him in season 1 and 2. I looked it up. If I was going to compare the two, I'm not sure I really could because it's almost like they're
No.
playing different. They're playing like they're
Versions.
each doing something different. Yeah.
Yes.
I thought Elsis did a really good job in the first 2 seasons playing the more like, bit more cocky, bit more arrogant type. Whereas this one, he's got the confidence a little bit more quiet. Um,
Yes.
and and by the time we get to hit season 4, I was completely sold on Michael Bishop once we got there. So it was a little bit of a janky start to begin with, but I think he grew into the role fairly quickly. And one of the nice things is it didn't it didn't feel like it was too much of a change. Like it didn't feel like he was incongruous with the rest of the family. I thought he
Right.
actually fit in with their dynamic fairly well, and like his interactions with the other actors, he really kind of he fit right back into things. So I thought he did a really good job with all of that. And when we get to season 4 and he gets his powers, I was a little bit disappointed, to be honest. At least at first, I think I kind of maybe come around a little bit, but I really liked and I think they found a way to make it interesting. So it's not, but I thought the idea of him joining the fire department and like, finding another way to help people was a really interesting track. And I was a little bit disappointed that once he gets powers, that whole thing kind of like fades into the background and goes away.
Yeah. That was I agree. that was the one thing that I didn't like about that. I'm like, why couldn't you kind of like bring that in, especially at the point where they're still kind of trying to say that they're not who they are. You know, they're still trying to
Mhm.
hide their identities. Wouldn't it have been cool to have, him with the powers and then show like him on the job with the powers and how does he deal with that and whatever? Because they were already kind of doing that a little bit with having Jordan come in. And at one scene, I think he, did his cold breath or whatever and then ducked out or whatever. And they were like, "Are you the mask?" And they were, and he was,
Mhm.
and Jonathan was like, "No, I'm not him." A little more play on that would have been good. And it also would have, to me, I think it would have kept him a little more in. See, they're so outside of the city and they're trying to be far away so they don't have to explain themselves, because
Mhm.
they're out there, But by being a fireman, he was kind of in it, right? He was in the community. And we saw more of the community when we saw him, right? He was also in season 2, he was also on the football team and all that stuff
Mhm.
going on. He was very much in the community. And Jordan was the nerdy one. He was kind of like out a little bit outside the community as well. So it would have been cool to kind of keep him in that role and just kind of see how that kind of goes. But when he got the powers, it was more like this has become a, I don't want to say a buddy movie. It's not a movie, but you know what I'm saying? It was kind of becoming that feel a little bit. Not in the beginning, because kind of in the beginning it was more of a, you know, well, who's gonna save this person? Well, I can't do it and I don't want to do it. And it was like a
Mhm.
brothers fighting thing. But then at kind of near the end, it became kind of a buddy thing. But yeah, not to get too much into season 4 and about the powers thing. I agree that I wish they would have kept some of his fireman role there. I think, to me, in season 3, when Jordan was kind of spinning out, Jonathan was kind of solidifying himself in with the high schoolers and everything like that and the community. And he just kind of lost a little bit of his identity when he got powers. So I liked him better in season 3. I liked who he became in season 3. The dynamic between him and Jordan 2 in season 3. You're right. As it got, more and more in the season started to be defined. I was a little concerned too there in the beginning, especially with all the other stuff going on with Lois and the Bruno Manheim thing going on. I was kind of concerned in the beginning that he was going to end up being like a background character. That's kind of how he was. We weren't really seeing who he was in those first few episodes. And I was kind of scared. I was like, now he's supposed to be, in with the family. We're supposed to see the whole family dynamic here. And he's, kind of being pushed in the background. And I'm wondering if it's because maybe they were trying to get us used to a new Johnathan without saying anything, you know?
That may have been, yeah, that would make sense. That they're trying to just kind of like ease people into it, and maybe also easing
Yeah.
him into the dynamic as the actor, and kind of giving him just enough to get
Yeah.
him to the point where he gets a little bit more comfortable in the role. So that's very possible, and I think that kind of worked to the detriment for my initial reception to Michael Bishop, because like I said, at first it took me a little bit to kind of warm up to him, and I think it was
Yeah.
because they were holding him back a little bit, but I did warm up to him eventually. One of the things I also like too was the dynamic between the three kids, right? We have Natalie like getting much more integrated with the family here, and
Yes.
we see them hanging out with Sarah and everything. And we got that whole subplot with her new boyfriend Mateo, which you find
Mateo.
out is actually Bruno Manheim's son. All of
Right.
that was very well done. I really enjoyed all that whole dynamic, and it's funny because one of the things I was worried about back when this show was first announced, and they said that they're going to have it's going to be Superman and Lois, and they're going to have twin sons, and one of them's going to be like the jockey one, and the other one's going to be kind of like the social outcast. I was like, oh, great. We're getting into like, CW cliche territory here.
Right.
And they didn't do that. They did
No.
I thought this whole series, they did a really good job of like holding back on a lot of the CW cliches that some of the Arrowverse shows kind of fell into, especially over time.
Right.
And they did a really good job of zeroing in on what made this show work, and they stuck with that throughout all 4 seasons. And I thought that was a really admirable thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. And even not so much the Arrowverse shows, when you're talking about the teens and the teens getting together, the dynamic is different than like a Gossip Girl or a One Tree Hill, any of those other CW shows that feature teens in certain roles, like you're saying, the social outcast role, this role. They end up having their own personalities to me. They have their own nuances. I was concerned about Natalie and John Henry Irons because they were from a different universe. And of course, because they are Black people, I was concerned that they were all going to end up being side characters, right?
Mhm.
Just side characters with no depth. And that was going to bother me because CW shows, when they have like maybe one or two Black characters, they end up being one thing. Um
Mhm.
Kind of like the high school coach, but he's just there for comic relief. you know.
It's funny. I was recently. I was. You've ever watched the movie Not Another Teen Movie?
Yes, yes, I have. Oh my
So
gosh, it's been forever though.
yeah. So I was recently rewatching it the other day, and the token Black guy in it who calls out that thing so much so that when he goes to the party, there's another Black guy there, and he goes like, "Hey, what are you doing here? This is my thing." And he's like, "I'm sorry."
Exactly.
He goes and he leaves.
Yeah, see? I mean, it's a thing. It really is. It's a
Mhm.
thing so much that, they make fun of it. And I was concerned that it was going to be a thing, but the fact that Natalie has a whole relationship going on with Mateo, but she's also in this friend group. Everybody that's in the friend group has their own things, right, that make them who they are. The other thing, though, too, I liked about this, and speaking on it like a cultural level, is I love the fact that, because I believe season 3 is the season where it's not Sophia, it's the other Cushing daughter. It's not Sophia.
Not Sarah, you mean, or the
Sarah.
younger daughter? You mean Sarah, the older one? Yeah.
The older one is Sarah, right? Sophia is
Yes.
the
Yeah.
younger one. So Sarah has her quinceanera. Isn't that this season 3? Or was that
Yes, I
at the end?
believe so.
Yeah. So
It was either season 2 or it's been a while since I've seen the whole thing too. So
yeah,
I
it's kind of right. It's kind of coming together, blending together. But I think it was season 3. Also, starting in season 2, they actually kind of mention it and they talk about Kansas and how, and this is actual real history, and this is actually really a thing in
wait,
Kansas.
I think that was
That was
season 2
season
because this
2.
is trig because I think we talked about this when we talked about season 2.
Yes, yes. So they started it with season 2, and then with her quinceanera, and I think her quinceanera was actually in season 3, and how we actually saw her going through all those things, having all of this cultural, true to the place stuff in it, and having these people interact in a realistic way instead of having a token person do this and a token person do that. It really makes the dynamic, one that's interesting to watch, and not another teen movie. No, I mean, I meant to say not another CW teen show, So I really like that part as well, that they all kind of get pulled in, and they have their own drama going on too. So in season 3, they have their own teenage issues and just regular teenage stuff. We're broken up. What do we do now? And Jonathan and his girlfriend, and then the father issues going on with all of that. They had their own drama going on, which that was really a good story. That was a good idea for the story runners to do that and keep these characters, as whole characters with their own character arc, because it's very easy to focus on this whole Lois plot line and everything that Lois and Clark have going on, and relegate these teenagers to background. But I like the fact that Natalie, she likes Mateo. Then she finds out that Mateo is Bruno Manheim's son. And so that actually pulls them into the adult plot line of, you know, having being the whole villain. Is he the villain? Well, I like him.
Mhm.
And then Mateo is actually, the way he talks and is talking to his parents is actually kind of affecting the way his parents are looking at things and the way his parents see things. And so, you know, it really they did a really good job, I will say, with all the teenage characters here. They
Mhm.
did a
Yeah.
really good job bringing them in, and you feel like without one of these characters there, something is missing. After you see season 3 and you're like, what if Natalie wasn't even there? Wow. That would actually be missing part of a story, versus you can just erase this character and not even
Mhm.
you know? So I like that part. I like that a whole lot.
So before we go back to the cultural things, I want to talk about that in regards to Bruno and his whole storyline too. But I did want to jump back a little bit to the romance side of thing and about the Clark and Lois romance. We see them being physically intimate, very physically intimate at the beginning of this season, and I thought that was great because it's not a side that we often see of that. And I feel like it's funny because not recently, but I'd recently rebroadcasted the episode I did on my show, Superhero Cinephiles, about Superman 2. And, for decades in the pop culture, there's been this idea that Superman and Lois can't be physically intimate unless he loses his powers. And I was rewatching Superman 2, and there are two versions of this movie, right? There's the theatrical cut that was directed by Richard Lester. So there were two versions of Superman 2. There's Richard Donner was originally supposed to direct the second one, but during production, him and the producers had falling out. He ended up getting fired from it, and they brought on Richard Lester to finish the movie and reshoot a bunch of scenes. And then eventually, after Superman Returns came out, Donner was given the opportunity to go back to his original footage and to kind of recut his own version of Superman 2. So there are these two versions of this movie. And in the theatrical version, which is probably what is has driven most of this discourse for decades. I don't know. Have you seen Superman 2? Do you remember?
And Superman 2, the one where Lois is in the car and the car
No, that's the
and he
first
has to
one.
go. Okay, that's the first one. Remind me, Superman 2, because I have seen it. I just
So in
don't
Superman
remember what the
2, he reveals who he is to Lois. He reveals his identity, and he talks to his in the theatrical cut his mother in the fortress, but it's his father Marlon Brando again in the Donner cut, and he says that he
Okay,
wants to
yeah.
be with her, and he decides to, and his parents in both versions they tell him you can't serve humanity. You can't do your mission and be in this relationship. You have to make a choice.
Yeah.
And so he chooses to be with Lois and to give up his powers, which I have problems with that whole idea, the idea that Superman has to choose between Lois or his mission. But that aside, one of the interesting things is in the theatrical cut, he gives up his powers and then him and Lois sleep together. But in the Donner cut, it's actually flipped. They sleep together and then he gives up his powers. So this decades of this discourse has all been driven just because Lester flipped those two scenes.
Wow. Can't believe that this has been, oh my gosh. I can't believe that this has been an issue, because this is the thing for me. I'm probably looking at this as a romance author first.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like there's soulmates, They need to get together. And then, of course, as you come into Superman and Lois, obviously they've gotten together, they have kids.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, come on. This is 2025. Okay, there's no
Mm-hmm.
stork, coming to somebody's door. But yes, I totally agree that it's that this particular season, season 3, it definitely ramped up the whole intimacy between them
Mm-hmm.
and them being physical. And obviously, I'm here for that. Okay. I'm totally here for that. But what I also liked about it is because she is going through breast cancer, that she has some issues about her body. So
Mm-hmm.
we have to see them intimate first and loving each other first before she even has these body issues and has a conflict about that and being
Exactly.
intimate with him. We have to see that. And we did not necessarily see that in season 1. We saw it a little bit in season 2. There were a couple of scenes in season 2 where it was cutaway scenes, though. They
Mm-hmm.
were like, oh my gosh, and then it's cutaway. But but here they had to ramp up the intimacy if they were going to actually have that particular part of her breast cancer journey, which I am totally glad that they did, because that keeps bringing the real of her breast cancer journey. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that is a real thing that women go through when they get mastectomies, when they have surgeries like that. There's a real thing that happens there. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, and to show that part, it just makes everything more authentic. So they
Right.
have to show them being more intimate. And I especially loved, and this is obviously going to go into a little bit into season 4 as well, but I especially loved that they had the story about the red dress, where he had bought her the dress, and it was like he used like all of his money or whatever to buy her this dress. And he just loved this dress. And then, of course, in this season, as she is putting clothes in for the Goodwill, she puts that dress in there, and he's like, you can't do that. You cannot give away this dress, because he's thinking one thing and he's seeing her in one way, but she's looking at that dress and she's thinking about the cutouts in the dress and the sexiness of the dress, and she's not feeling that way because she's been cut on.
Right.
She's going through this journey, and and kind of in the end, when we see her in the dress again, I was like, that's bringing that
Mm-hmm.
back. And she,
Yeah.
yeah, it was just like, just had just like a little moment there where he opens the door and she's in the dress in season 4 at the very end. It brings me back to that season 3, but it also brings me back to the feeling about that season and about having them be real folks. It also kind of makes me think about the dynamic between superheroes and their loves, which of
Mm-hmm.
course we talked about, which is how we ended up even talking of ended up being on these shows together. Is
Mm-hmm.
I was on your show talking about superheroes and love, and you know, very well, again, I'm not a comic book reader, so I don't, see the whole stories play out. But in the various movies and the shows, we see like maybe the falling in love or maybe the brief conflict of love. But we don't see these people are married and they're enduring. And how does a superhero endure when
Mm-hmm.
whether the person in love with them is also a superhero or whether they're just a regular old Joe or Joan? You don't kind of see superheroes have regular problems too. And some
Mm-hmm.
of those regular problems have to do with relationships and have to do with the person that they love. And I love that dynamic. here.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the things that the other CW DC shows kind of lost the plot on as they went on, is it became all about the superhero side of it. And by the end of the Flash, by the end of Supergirl, by the end of Arrow, everybody, pretty much everybody in the main cast was a superhero. And so
Yeah.
that sucked out a lot of that human dynamic that really makes it that interesting. And I think even though we do have Jordan get powers in the fourth season, they still manage to keep this show fairly grounded in that human drama aspect of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And you mentioned the Flash, and this is what turned me off in the very, very end of the Flash is when Barry and Iris are trying to have the kids that they know that they're going to have in the future. And it just
Mm-hmm.
becomes comical, it just
Yeah.
becomes kind of like a farce. And, granted, that show is not going to be as gritty as this show is. I'm not saying this show is gritty, but
But more
compared to
like
the Flash,
real. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
real. Granted, that show is not as real as this one is, but it had its moments, and it could have gone that way if they made their relationship a little bit more real, like Lois and Clark is
Mm-hmm.
here, or like, right. I say Lois
No,
and Clark.
absolutely.
Of
Yeah.
course, that makes me think about Lois and Clark, which was also a bit of a farce. That just kind of turned me off a little bit too. I
Yeah.
liked Lois and Clark, but it turned me off a little bit too. But we talked about that on your show. And for everybody that hasn't watched or hasn't heard that episode, Superheroes in Love, you've got to hear that episode on Perry's show. But I think it's interesting that they do that with the Superman character.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny because of what you said earlier about him being the good guy. So it's also the good guy is also the one that says, okay, we'll wait and we won't do
Mm-hmm.
anything. And the thing is, these people are adults. These people are married. We have to show them in this way, right? For this to be authentic, and
Well,
yeah,
that was
in the other ones,
that.
they don't do that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, also that was something that annoyed me about Superman and Lois when they reveal that the whole thing, like, well, Clark has never had sex, right? He's been saving himself for marriage. I'm just like, and they did that here too. That was one of the things I didn't like
They
about
did do that here.
Superman and Lois. And there, it's like we don't have to do this. I mean, it's not 1950. Superman can. I mean, come on.
Yeah. But maybe it's because of this whole feud that I didn't even really know about, that he was gonna lose his powers. I'm like, what? And people are arguing about that.
Yeah,
I'm
it's funny because it's like I think Superman 2 unintentionally started this, and then there was a very famous essay, I think it was originally in Playboy, called Man of Steel, Women of Kleenex, that talked about like the physical issues that Superman would have sleeping with normal women, and then the famous scene in Mallrats where they talk about Superman and Lois, and and he says like only Wonder Woman is strong enough to have Superman's baby, but and she's like the only way he could be with regular women is with a kryptonite condom. And it's like those three things that like started this whole discourse for years, and I'm glad we're now getting away from it, because it was funny because in Smallville they had this whole thing too where it's like he and Lana got together when he didn't have his powers, then his powers came back, and all of a sudden he couldn't sleep with Lana anymore because he was afraid of hurting her,
yeah.
and he couldn't tell her why. And then later on he's sleeping with Lois, and it's a throwaway line because I think the producers realized they kind of wrote themselves into the corner. He's like, well, I've been training at the fortress with Jor-El to have more control over my powers. Like, your ghost dad is training you to have sex.
Oh, it's
uh
awful. Oh my gosh.
but
Oh,
then we get this show, and even though I don't like it, BVS also, we saw the bathtub scene as well. So we're now getting into this
right.
territory where we're seeing Superman being intimate with Lois without having to like lose his powers or anything like that. So I like that we're leaving that whole debate in the rearview mirror.
Right. And it also kind of makes me think about, the Superman movie coming up, you know. But I
Yeah.
feel, and I'm like, I hope we get some of the, especially if this is the first of many, or this is the first of, some that, the same character will be in, or the same version of Superman will be in, that we, see a more real life, realistic 2025 version,
Have you
of
seen the new trailer?
I saw part of the new trailer, but I haven't seen the whole thing. I need to see
Oh,
it.
you got to watch it. Yeah, it's good. It opens up with this scene with Clark and Lois, and it seems like they got a really good modern dynamic with it. So it's
Okay.
looking really good. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm really excited about it.
I
And
you
plus,
know,
it's
I
James
ca-
Gunn. Like James Gunn does relationship
yes.
drama. He does character drama
He
so
does.
well.
He does. That's why I'm like, I feel like we'll get at least some part of this authenticity that we love from this CW version of Superman and Lois. We're
Hmm.
going to we're going to still feel that with the James Gunn. I mean,
And
you know,
he's cited this show as being like, something that he really enjoyed, something that he liked a lot, something that he thought did a really good
good.
job with the Superman character. So yeah, I think this, it's funny because I think this show, as much as it's been talked about in the fan community, there's also, it seems like it's still something that is people, a lot of people have slept on. Right? It feels like
Oh,
not a
yeah.
lot of people have really kind of like given this show its due. And I think in time, I think people are going to be looking back on this show and rediscovering it, be like, how come I didn't know about this at the time? Because
Right.
I think this show has done such a good job kind of like filling this gap in the Superman stuff between the Snyder films and then between the James Gunn film. And we've had this little thing here in the Oasis that not a lot of people have really paid much attention to. And I think that it
Right.
could be a combination of the CW's issues at the time. It could also be the fact that, Warner Brothers as well, the whole issues with their restructuring and everything,
Hmm.
and the people being tired of the Arrowverse stuff. And I think this show kind of like hit at a time when the audience wasn't really primed to accept it. But I think if people have slept on this show, I think they're going to be discovering it again in the coming years and really realizing just how special it really was. And I want to talk about Bruno though in this and Pia, because this was, I was a little bit disappointed at the beginning when they opened up and it was Bruno Manheim, because my feeling at the beginning of the season was like, well, why are we doing Bruno Manheim? We could be doing Lex Luthor here instead. But what they did with it, by the time we got to the end of the season, I'm just like, oh no, that was actually really solid. I really liked what they did with, like, he was a very well-rounded character in this. I thought
Yes.
he was, I'm trying to looking up the actor's name, Chad Coleman. He did such a great job of showing this being this very well-rounded, character that, I wasn't expecting him to really be this interesting.
Yeah, I agree. Yes. And as someone who, of course, I'm looking for Lex Luthor, right? And I think did in the well, of course, we're trying to both remember this from from so long ago. But I feel like we had like a little piece of the Lex Luthor story kind of at the end of season
Well, yeah,
two,
he
right? Where that is where I thought it was going to go as well. I was like,
mm,
okay, so who is this? And then Bruno Manheim, I don't know his character really. And so I was like, okay, so is he part of is Lex Luthor going to show up at some point? And then after a few episodes, I was like, I don't really care. I don't really care about Lex Luthor because, you talk about a villain that you aren't sure exactly if how you want to feel about this. Like Lex Luthor, I hate him, right? And I know I'm supposed to hate him. I'm supposed
mm,
to hate him. I do hate him. He's not a good guy. Bruno Manheim, I'm feeling some kind of way, right? It's
yeah.
I don't like him in the beginning. He's coming off it. He's definitely giving us, he's definitely giving us a vibe of, villain, but
Mhm.
it's it's almost justified villain, right?
It is. It
You
is.
know?
Yeah.
So so that just pulls you in right there. And then when we see even another side of him, once we see his wife, Pia, is that her
Yeah.
name?
Yeah.
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 Once we meet his wife, and once we then see the whole family dynamic come together in those middle episodes, we're like, oh, I really don't know what to feel about this guy. And
Mhm.
I'm really conflicted. And I really like that I'm really conflicted about this.
Yeah.
Right? The fact that, he did some underhanded things, he did those underhanded things for some reasons that we will applaud, right? We love the fact that he's trying to make his neighborhood better. We love the and it's funny because that kind of gave me a little bit of like the penguin vibes because I was already seeing the penguin, and so all of this stuff is coming together. But in the penguin, he also has issues with his old neighborhood, and and those kind of issues going on with the neighborhood, right? And so it almost gives like, you know, Penguin is doing this, which is kind of bringing, it's not helping the neighborhood really. It's just helping himself and some of the people who he's around, and he's doing it in his neighborhood. But Bruno Manheim is doing this stuff, but he's trying to actually help his neighborhood. And both of those neighborhoods, Crown Heights in the Penguin, and this neighborhood here, who I can't remember the neighborhood name
Suicide
of,
Slum.
thank you, were both neglected by their cities, by their various cities. They both were forgotten neighborhoods. And how the two of these villains dealt with, their forgotten neighborhoods. It's like, oh my gosh, this is really an interesting dynamic. A, it's why I like the Penguin, the show, not necessarily the
Mhm.
Penguin, the person. But B, this is why I had a good feeling about Bruno Manheim, the villain, which I'm like, he's supposed to be a villain, but I
Mhm.
like what he's doing here. So yeah, I mean, I agree. He was just a
And
fascinating
also
character.
it came full circle in so many ways, like in the last episode of this of season 4 too, when he goes to Bruno to ask to like get his help to try and change the world. And so I like that aspect of it as well. They brought it back. But also too the fact that him and his wife, they killed Boss Moxie and they framed Lex Luthor for it, and they kind of and they inadvertent, and they basically tricked Lois and Clark into helping them do it and put him away.
Yeah. Yep.
And there's this whole idea to like you no, we had to get rid of him. And so there is that, you're putting the right man in prison but for the wrong reasons. And so it's like this is an interesting ethical dilemma. And then
Yeah.
Lois and Clark come to this point like, well, do we expose this and expose the fact that yeah, Lex Luthor was framed for something, for this crime he didn't commit, and risk releasing this monster? And then it definitely comes back to bite them in the ass in the 4th season. And there's not really, and one of the things I like too is like the show doesn't really give you an answer to that question. It leaves it there for you to kind of answer on your own. I think that it did a really good job with that.
Yeah, it does leave you to answer that on your own. And two, to add on to that, and maybe this is because of all of the political nastiness that is kind of going on in the US right now, it leaves it unanswered because the dynamic of what is going on, like when Bruno is talking to Lois in season 4, when she goes to the jail and she's asking him for help, and he is explaining, this is why we did this is why we set up Lex
Mm-hmm.
Luthor, and this is why you should have kept him in jail, and look at what he's doing, and here is how he's like breaking it down for her. You feel like, oh my gosh, I'm living in what he's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
right now, there is not an answer right now. Not one that we're going to talk about on here anyway. But there's not an answer for how do you deal with that, right? How do you've done something that is totally wrong. You did it for the right reasons. So they've undid it. And now you've got a chaos on your hands. It's like, what do we do now? You know?
Yeah.
And okay, so we're living with trying to fix the wrong.
Mhm.
And should we have done that in the first place? And you're right, that's not answered here. It's should we have tried to fix this wrong, or should we just have let him stay in jail? If we had known what was going to happen, would we have done this? And right, it's there's no answer to that. And and them trying to fix the wrong gives them this chaos that we are now living in. I
Mhm.
feel like in the real world. And and there's no answer to that either, you know, except in the
Mhm.
very end when, Superman says, I'm going to try to fix the world. It's very interesting, though, that, he talks about there's this whole period where the world it seemed really, well, we'll talk about that. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I don't want to get off our current topic of Bruno, but Bruno is that villain that it's like, am I supposed to root for this villain? And you find
Mhm.
yourself sort of rooting for this villain. And for me, it's a villain that I don't know much about,
Oh, he's very
and
different from the comics. In the comics, he's just,
oh,
kind of a
okay.
standard
He's
mob
not
boss
this at
type
all.
character.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I like the way they've done him here then. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
same here.
glad that I don't.
I never cared about him much in the comics at all. So I was, or like in other times he's appeared. I think he appeared in the Superman animated series from the '90s. I think he appeared on Lois and Clark. I can't recall, but yeah, he's just basically standard mob boss. Head of Intergang. Nothing really compelling so much. Nothing compared to this, at least.
Right.
Um,
This is depth. So yeah, Bruno, an interesting character, yes, but also his family was very interesting as well. The fact that we have Pia here to help Lois with her journey. Yeah, what did you think about the whole family dynamic, the Manheim family dynamic, especially with Pia there and her
I thought
power?
Yeah, I thought it was great. It was very much kind of this inverse of the Kent Lane family dynamic in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
And which is funny because we did the inverse thing in season two, but it's handled so much better by having this other family here showing a different side of that, how to use power for good, basically, right? Just different versions of power. And I thought, yeah, Daya Vija, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. She played Pia, did an amazing job. I thought she was definitely one of the standout performances of the season. Just as the comic fan, I didn't like that they gave her the onomatopoeia character identity because that character in the comics is just it's not the character in the comics, obviously created by Kevin Smith actually, but it was a
Really?
man in the comics. Yeah, Kevin Smith. It was when he was writing he did a run on Green Arrow and he created this character onomatopoeia because one of the things about comic books that people know is the sound effects, right?
Yes. Yeah. I see what you're
So
saying.
this character's whole shtick, like he doesn't really speak in the comics except when he is doing something, and he speaks the sound of whatever he's doing. Like if he shoots someone, he says bang before he shoots him or something like that. So,
Oh,
so this is
no.
kind of it's a kind of character that it only really works kind of like in the comic medium. So when you're bringing it into another version, you have to like they brought him in. He was in Arrow, kind of. They had like a character that was inspired by him, played
Mhm.
by J. August Richards in the first season, I think. And the mask that Pia wears is basically the onomatopoeia mask. The thing, but there's no like sonic
Oh,
powers or anything like that. And the thing that
okay.
kind of weirded me out about it is because there is a sonic powered supervillainess character, female supervillain in the comics that is part of Superman's rogues gallery called the Silver Banshee. So I don't know why they didn't just make Pia the Silver Banshee of this, but that was just, again, this is just a
Yeah.
weird comic thing. I'm going on here. But I thought that was a little bit bizarre. Even now, I still wonder why they chose the onomatopoeia character for that instead of the much more obvious connection. But that aside, I thought she did a great job as well, and the family dynamic, her death scene too, it
I
was all
know. Oh
beautifully
my.
handled.
Yeah.
One thing we didn't talk about yet too that I want to talk before we move into season 4 is when the diner scene when Clark confronts Emmett.
Mm-hmm.
This goes back to Superman 2, right? The famous diner scene where the guy bullies him when he doesn't have powers. Then he
Right.
goes back
Yes.
as Superman and he humiliates him and all that, which I've got a lot of issues with that
Yes.
scene in that movie. But this is my favorite take on like that kind of thing. Like, and Lois is telling
Yes.
like Clark gets all angry when he finds out that Emmett has stole John's truck and everything, and he
Mm-hmm.
pulled a gun on Lois, and he's like,
Yep.
oh, I'm going down there, and Lois is like, this is not a job for Superman. He's like, no, he's not going.
Right.
And I made sure especially to rewatch this scene because man, Tyler Hoechlin really brings it in that scene.
Yes.
and,
Yes.
and and I loved it. I loved it. He goes full on hardcore, and he keeps it. He just lets Emmett like try and punch him. It doesn't work. Then he just slams him against the counter. He's like, "You're gonna leave now."
Right. Yeah, yeah. And then there are a few other scenes like that where I'm like, I really like Tyler Hoechlin as Superman. And we talked about this in the first two seasons, but he does some things like that in season 3 and in season 4 with his, fight with Lex, which we'll talk about. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and some a couple of other things in season 4 as well, but it's just those kinds of things. It's just I'm like, I really like Tyler Hoechlin as Superman. I
I
mean,
know.
he's just so good. He's so good, and I'm like, I don't know what he's going to do next or what he is doing next. If it's, something, an action kind of thing like this, or if it's something dramatic. But I think he could do either one at this point with the
I mean,
range.
he's so versatile. I didn't really realize it until people were because I saw him in Teen Wolf, right? That was the first thing I saw him in, and then when they said he was going to be Superman, appearing on Supergirl as Superman, I'm like, you're getting the Teen Wolf guy for Superman? That's a choice, okay? But man, he did such an amazing
Right?
job. And then did you see the movie Palm Springs?
I did. Yes, I love that
Yeah,
movie.
Jesus, that amazing movie, like really, really
Yeah.
underrated. But he was completely different type of character, and then he voices Sephiroth, the villain, in the new Final Fantasy VII game. So it's like he's got this incredible range. He goes from playing like
Yep.
definitely I don't know. I think from what we've seen so far of James Gunn's Superman, I think David Cornsweet will probably take the spot. But right now, he is my favorite take on Superman. Like I think I'm
Yeah.
all respect to Christopher Reeve, right? But his Superman is much more of like the God Among Men version, right? It's this version of
Yeah.
he's separate from humanity. There's
Right.
less of the human side of him.
Hmm.
But Tyler Hoechlin, he does such a great job of merging those two sides of the Superman side and the Clark side. And
Yes.
basically when I say there are three sides to Superman, there's the Superman, there's the Clark Kent disguise, and there's the real Clark Kent. And he
Right.
manages to nail all three of those and
All of them.
really
Yes.
ground this character in a really like kind of human feel. And yeah, I'm really excited to see what he's gonna do next.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. But before we do get into season 4, there was something I wanted to say that you mentioned about season 3 that I know what it was. I agree from a watcher standpoint, a watcher that was trying to stay out of all the Warner Brothers stuff and the CW stuff, that this particular show came at a time for the watcher who maybe was a fan of the shows or a fan of the comics and wanted to see the shows. It came at a time where we were over Arrowverse and we were over, what they were doing. The Flash was starting to get a little weary, And I think the bigger controversy that was going on kind of or around or a little bit after the time that Superman started was the whole Batgirl and I mean Batwoman and Ruby Rose, and then Ruby Rose not being in, and then now there's a black woman as Batwoman, and what are we doing here? And I think that this show kind of was in the middle of all the negativity around all the CW Arrowverse shows. And that's why it got slept on. And that it did get slept on because people were over it, right? And to me, you had the best out of all the Arrowverse shows, I think this is the best one. I mean, that's my personal
Oh,
opinion.
definitely. Hands
I
down,
think
hands
this
down.
is totally the best one. And I actually went in, you know, I thought I was gonna be all in on Arrow and I wasn't. I was more in on the Flash and I stayed with the Flash a lot longer than most people did. But hands down, Superman and Lois was the best one. And I think it also is the one that got slept on.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah. We will continue this discussion on our next episode. Make sure you're subscribed to Nerdy Romantics Podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and visit nerdyromanticspodcast.com to subscribe to our newsletter, where you can get show notes directly in your inbox. Thank you for listening.